Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Imam Abu Hanifa, several biographies have been written about Imam Abu Hanifa. And many of the things that people sort of have heard from others, or have heard at different conferences, or have heard from, you read in a book here or there a little bit about Imam Abu Hanifa, many of those are well known. So many of those points are well known. Some of the points that people have heard about Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, there's very famous stories that they used to call Imam Abu Hanifa the peg. The reason they used to call Imam Abu Hanifa the peg is because he used to pray for 40 years, he used to pray Isha and Fajr with the same wudu. So for 40 years consecutively, he would be standing in the masjid all night, such that he didn't go to sleep, that he could use the same wudu from Isha for Fajr, and so they used to call him the peg. So you'll hear this story. Another story that you'll hear is that Imam Abu Hanifa was so righteous that one time a sheep was stolen in his village. And Imam Abu Hanifa, for 7 years after that, gave up eating sheep meat. And the reason why he gave up eating the meat of sheep was because he said that the lifespan of a sheep maximum is 7 years. So I don't want that my tongue touch the meat of that stolen lamb, therefore for 7 years I will not eat sheep meat, because nobody knew which lamb was stolen within the village. And another famous thing that's talked about is that Imam Abu Hanifa, some people say that, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa, actually, his father one time was walking in a forest. And as his father was walking through the forest, he was walking along a river, he saw an apple come down the river. And so as he saw that apple, he picked up the apple, and he took a bite of that apple, and actually ate that apple, and then began walking further up the river. When he got further up the river, he saw, Imam Abu Hanifa's father that is, he saw a whole orchard of apple trees. And he was shocked. And he actually realized that what he had eaten was wrong. It was haram. Because that orchard belonged to somebody else. And so he ate an apple out of that orchard it's as if he stole that apple. Because he didn't ask anybody for that apple. He had actually just found it randomly. And then he realized that it belonged to the owner of the orchard. So he went to the owner and he knocked on the door and he said to the owner, "Will you forgive me?" And the owner said to him, "I won't forgive you." So Imam Abu Hanifa's father was crushed. He was a very righteous man. He said, "Well, how can that be? What will I have to do in order to make you forgive me? I cannot live in this world knowing that I did this sin." So then the father said, "Well, I have a daughter, and she's deaf, she's dumb, and she's blind. And if you agree to marry her, then I'll forgive you." So Imam Abu Hanifa's father was stuck. He said, "Well, I can't go in front of my Lord with this sin, and this person's not going to forgive me, so I have no choice." So Imam Abu Hanifa's father then agreed to marry the girl. Then on his wedding night, when he actually went into the room to meet the girl, the woman began speaking to him. And he looked at the woman and she was very attractive. And she could hear everything that he said. So he was shocked. So he went back to the father of the girl and he said, "Well, you said your daughter was deaf, dumb, and blind. How can it be that she's sitting here and speaking in front of me?" He said, "Yeah, she's deaf. She's deaf in the sense that she's never heard a lie and she's never heard anybody backbite. And she's blind in the sense that she's never seen anybody that's not her mahram. And she's dumb in the sense that she's never spoken a lie or backbitten anyone else." So that was, that's another famous story about Imam Abu Hanifa, that was his father and that was his mother, and that Imam Abu Hanifa was the product of that. Now, given all those historical narrations, there's a very important thing that you need to understand about history when we discuss history in the Islamic context. And that is that these stories are extremes. When you hear history like this about the different ai they're considered extremes. And when you have extreme stories to this degree, you have to have a proof that is just as powerful to establish that particular narration. And in the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, we don't have a proof like that. That's the first thing. So these stories may be true, they may not be true. That's the first point. Second point. These kind of fantastic stories that you hear about the different ai these are not the proof of their greatness. Imam Abu Hanifa's having stood up for 40 years, whether he did it or not, is not the proof of his greatness. And people who have devoted themselves to an Islamic life will know that greatness doesn't occur in one night or with one particular action. Rather, greatness is a consistent effort towards doing good and remaining on that effort from birth to death. That's what's considered great. And in one of the histories that I read for Imam Abu Hanifa, he mentioned all these points. He said, these stories are great, But these stories, put them aside because these don't tell us anything about Imam Abu Hanifa. We don't learn about Imam Abu Hanifa. What was he really like? What was his everyday life like? How did he used to treat his students? Why did he begin studying? What were the things that he did? What were the books that he read? These are the more important things. And how was he consistent? From day one to the very last day he took his breath, how was he regular in his actions and his studies? How did he develop himself? And why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept his work to such an extent that half the ummah acts upon the way that he derived fiqh from the Quran and the Hadith? So, I think that's a more important thing to know about Imam Abu Hanifa. So I put all those stories in the very beginning because they may be true, they may not be true. But let's just put them aside because we want to know who Imam Abu Hanifa was as the man, not as some saintly figure way above us. So the first point to understand is that the best description of Imam Abu Hanifa is from his student, Qadi Abu Yusuf. And Qadi Abu Yusuf was asked by Harun al-Rashid that, tell me about Imam Abu Hanifa. Now the amazing thing about this story is that Abu Yusuf, when he was asked to relate the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, didn't go and say, Imam Abu Hanifa didn't eat sheep for 8 years, or his father and mother were such miraculous people. He gave a very simple description. And in fact, this is the true description of a true person who you should respect and look at. He said, as far as I know, Abu Hanifa was extremely pious. He avoided all the forbidden things, and he remained silent, and he was absorbed in his thoughts most of the time. He answered questions only if he knew the answer. He was extremely generous, self-respecting, never asked anybody for a favor, and shunned the company of anyone who was worldly minded. He held worldly power and position in contempt, and he avoided slander and talked only well of other people. He was a man of profound learning. He was generous with his knowledge as he was with his wealth. And then on hearing this, Harun al-Rashid said, you have described the most incredible man. See, this is the essence of Islam. Not that you did one particular act that was amazing, but that you lived your life consistently, day in and day out, according to the Sunnah and the Quran, such that you became a model for the students that studied under you. That's what Imam Abu Hanifa was. He was an incredible human being. He was an incredible teacher, and he was an incredible student when he studied under his teachers. And then he developed an incredible methodology for looking at Quran and Hadith. Those are the things that make Imam Abu Hanifa, may Allah be pleased with him, unique. So, let's talk about some of the sort of daily aspects of his life. Like number one, his birth. Imam Abu Hanifa was born in Kufa. And his actual name was Nu'man. Nu'man ibn Thabit. Nu'man ibn Thabit. He's also known by his kunya, which was his nickname, meaning Abu Hanifa. And he's also known by the nickname Imam al-A'zam, the greatest Imam. He was born in 80 after Hijrah, the year 80 after Hijrah, and he lived to 150. He was born into a family of tradesmen who were actually of Persian origin, and they were descendants of Salman al-Farsi. It's said that his father actually met Ali radiallahu anhu, and he asked Ali to make a dua for his progeny, and Ali radiallahu anhu made a dua for his progeny, and Imam Abu Hanifa, some people say, was one of the results of that dua. As far as his childhood, he was born early enough that he actually met 4 different Sahaba. He met 4 Sahaba in his lifetime. Some people say he actually narrates hadith from those Sahaba, that's debated, but he met 4, if not 7 Sahaba during his lifetime. So that puts him in the category of Tabi'i. Tabi'i is defined as a person who saw one of the Sahaba. If you saw one of the Sahaba in a state of Iman, you get the classification of Tabi'i. And the Prophet ﷺ has said different things about the Tabi'i to sort of establish their veracity and their greatness. خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يُلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يُلُونَهُمْ. That the best generation is my generation, then the one after them, يعني the Sahaba, then the one after them, يعني the Tabi'in. In another hadith, it said, or in another riwayah, it might be from a Sahaba, that the best are the people, are my generation, the most honest are my generation, then the most honest after them are the generation after them, then the generation after them, and after that you can't trust the people. So there's different things to establish the greatness of the Tabi'in, and Imam Abu Hanifa was one of the Tabi'in. When he was born in Kufa, Kufa had become a great city of learning, a tremendous center of learning. And this was actually due to the efforts of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Because the Prophet ﷺ, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was sent to Kufa, and in Kufa he began to teach hadith and riwayah, to such an extent that every single household in Kufa, the majority, was so caught up in riwayah and hadith that that's all they used to do. That was the pastime in Kufa. And when Ali radiallahu anh visited Kufa, later on during his khilafah, when he saw every single house was so absorbed in learning, he himself said, what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud has done, I've never seen anywhere. And he congratulated Abdullah ibn Mas'ud for doing it. So it was the work of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud that actually established this learning within Kufa. And Imam Abu Hanifa was born into that situation. Now, when Imam Abu Hanifa was young, he was not interested in studying Islam at all. And many of us have that exact same history in their background. He was religious, he was righteous, but he wasn't interested in learning, although he was extremely brilliant. One day, he walked by one of the Imams in Kufa whose name was Sha'bi. Sha'bi was actually a very, very famous scholar, and he called Imam Abu Hanifa, and he